Hello everyone. So today we're going to be talking about another combo video that has changed the landscape significantly. So my name is Astinia. This is a series in which I talk about Devil May Cry history in terms of gameplay. So we're mostly going to be talking about particular players and the contributions to the gameplay as a whole, the gameplay scene, the style scene, whatever you want to call it, and or particular videos that were basically groundbreaking for their time. And this is one of them. This player is called PandaAttack, and I don't think he has made many videos other than this one, if at all. But this one video is called Bloody Junk. It's a combo video, and it has significantly influenced players, I think, and has shown a lot of cool stuff, and in some ways, some improvements over the last video that we saw, which was the first combo video ever called Hellsloth is Dead. Long story short, this guy is insane and he's comboing on a bunch of abysses in DMC 3. Really great music taste as well. So also, if I sound a little bit weird, it's because I'm trying to keep my voice low. It's a little bit early in the morning, but anyways, one thing I should mention is that there are doppelganger combos in this video, and I think the doppelganger isn't him controlling it, but another person controlling the doppelganger. So if you guys don't know, in DMC 3 on the PS2 version, you can connect the second controller, and I believe if you press start or select, I can't remember, it's been ages since I've done this, you can have the second player control Doppelganger or Virgil when you're fighting Arkham. You know how in the Arkham fight, Virgil comes in and your actions control Virgil's, but if you plug in a second controller, you can control Virgil independently or Doppelganger independently. So a lot of the things we covered in the past video about how we will use certain inputs to control Doppelganger differently will not really apply here. I'm pretty sure this is a second player playing it, so the combos are a little bit more, let's say, dynamic. So we start off really strong with this combo. Beautiful music, as I mentioned before. We're gonna see a lot of height adjustments, and one thing that I want to note about this video is that a lot of what he does is being comfortable and finding that sweet spot between being high in the air versus low on the ground. One of the things that I like to do personally, for certain characters, it depends on what tools they have. I like to be close to the ground and juggle an enemy. If I can transition from air to ground smoothly or ground to air smoothly, I have two of my major sort of categories of arsenal, right? So there are ground moves, and then there are air moves. Those are the two main things that you're using in a combo, whereas with more beginner combos and juggles and whatnot, people mostly use air moves and occasionally some ground moves. But being able to fluidly change states between hitting the enemy from the ground and hitting the enemy from the air is very useful because you have more variety and more to work with. And these combos are a really good first example of that. You'll see a lot of good, and as I mentioned this in the past video, a lot of good understanding of how to move yourself with moves. So like, look at how he lowers himself with a bunch of moves. Flicker in DMC 3, as I mentioned earlier in the other episode, super useful in DMC 3. The reason why it's super useful is that it hits the enemy a lot, but it also like causes Dante to fall down significantly. The very first part of Flicker animation causes you to gain a little bit of height, but after that you actually lose a significant amount of height, and it's really good for transitioning from the air to the ground while hitting the enemy. He knows how to lose height or gain height and keep the enemy in the air and like transition from the air to the ground and vice versa. super good. One thing that I should mention too is that this you might have had this happen to you. This back kick, you can do it by facing away from the enemy and having the enemy fairly close to you, and without moving the analog stick or locking on, you press melee. A lot of people do this by accident, but you can actually do it consistently, and that's how. Another thing we're going to talk about too is that he has this little thing that he does often. The important part is this. He jumps and then does swing. Depending on where you jump, you make the swing move in that direction. So here, he jumps backwards and does swing. And then swing moves backwards. Now, typically, if you were to jump straight up without moving the analog stick, Dante will kind of move a bit forwards, but not in this case. He moves backwards, and you could perhaps call this inertia. We really don't call this inertia, but for the sakes of like terminology, let's call it inertia. Inertia in DMC4 is way more different than this, but the outcome is still the same. You're applying some level of horizontal movement to an air move that otherwise wouldn't have that movement. In this case, you're modifying swing so that it moves you backwards. Now this is super useful because it can create space between you and the enemy, and basically anything that changes your spacing between the enemy, whether it be crazy like a stinger or subtle like this, especially subtle like this, is very useful for things like positioning and stuff. And as I mentioned in the last video, positioning is paramount. Here he does it fairly high up. The swing is fairly high up, but we'll start seeing swings that are much more closer to the ground, and those are a little bit difficult to time. It's not like the hardest thing in the world. You can do it consistently, right? But it is a little finicky. That's something that I should mention. Ah, there we see it again. So, yeah, I should play this. So, that's the end of the combo, but this is the hop into a swing that I mentioned earlier. But instead of like moving backwards, jumping backwards, he just jumps towards the enemy to get closer. I don't think he even needs to jump towards the enemy. I think he can shoot straight up, but I'm pretty sure jumping towards the enemy causes more movement towards the enemy. Oh, the Quicksilver combos here are a little bit interesting because he does make the most out of his Quicksilver gauge. He manages his DT pretty well. Look at how he catches the enemy before falling into the ground with that crazy combo. So, one thing too is that this is perhaps the first known instance in a video done purposefully where this Navon visual glitch happens. Notice how many lightning bolts happen here. A crazy amount. Now, we're going to talk about something that is a little bit technical, I guess. Not really gameplay related, but it will become related. Or it'll be relevant when we start talking about DMC4 videos and DMC4 players, and beyond that as well. But, long story short, think about a move as a unit of time, right? So here he did Navon Stinger move, which is called Reverb Shock. The amount of frames per move matter in these games. In DMC3, not so much, especially because unless you're using mods, you're going to be always playing at 60 FPS, but in the later DMCs, it'll become relevant. Reverb Shock is used to having a certain amount of frames every single time you do it, except in this case. This case is different because he's in this move for a bit longer than you would normally, simply because Quicksilver slows everything down for a split second. It kind of freezes everything in the game for a split second. It's not a complete freeze, as you can see, because even though Dante is stuck in this like pose, there's still stuff happening, right? See, the lightning bolts keep coming out, but because this move in game is lasting longer, it effectively has more frames. So because it has more frames, it causes more lightning bolts to show up. It's not really anything practical in gameplay, it just looks cool. And this does not just apply to Reverb Shock, it applies to any move that Dante has that creates electricity with bats. The reason I know this simply is because I used to think this is just a Quicksilver quirk, but when we had mods for DMC3, such as the Style Switcher or DDMK, both made by the same person, Serpentium, which is like a total god in my opinion, you have the option to increase the frame rate limit. Typically, the frame rate is limited to 60 FPS, but you can increase it up to like 250 or something crazy like that. And on normal speed without Quicksilver, you'll notice how the bats generate a lot more lightning, and it looks a little bit weirder. And yeah, that's basically why, because there's more frames per move. Really good DT management for these Quicksilver combos again. This combo is very interesting for a variety of reasons, as you can see. So there are a few things that happen in this combo video. First of all, this is one of the first combos that uses Royal Guard. Now, Royal Guard unfortunately limits your moveset, because with Guard, in theory, you'd think like, okay, I have Guard, but it's not really offensive. It is offensive if you like use releases. But if you're gonna combo an enemy, you're really not gonna be using those releases anyways, most likely than not. But one of the good things about Royal Guard is that Guard has a special property where you can cancel moves, but also the Guard itself is cancelable. And so I believe this is what is referred to as an Omni cancel in fighting games. Essentially, if we lay the moves on the timeline, right, there is move 1, Guard, and move 2. That's how they are in order. Now, Guard cancels move 1, but move 2 cancels Guard. And that's because Guard is cancelable. This also applies to DMC4. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to DMC5 because people making that game didn't think very straight, because unfortunately you can't cancel Guard in DMC5. We'll talk about that in the future video. But you'll see a lot of these kinds of cancels throughout the games in some way, shape, or form. So in DMC3, it's primarily Guard, but it is also Twosome Time. Twosome Time has a very similar property to this. In DMC4, it is also Guard, but there are, I don't think there's anything for DMC4 other than the same thing that DMC3 did. DMC Devil May Cry has gunshots that act as an Omni Cancel, kind of. And DMC5 has SCT, which is also somewhat like that, but a little bit more complicated. And also more limited in some ways. But this is useful in combos for obvious reasons. When he does this crazy combo with Navan called Jam Session, he cancels the ending that has a long recovery with a Guard into Cerberus. Now, here's the second thing that is interesting about this combo. One of the first is that it uses enemy behavior against itself. Abysses, when you knock them back, they'll get up and charge it back at you. This also kind of happens when you shoot them too many times in the air. When they're airborne, they kind of jump off of the hit stun that you're dealing to them, and then they attack you. The only exception to this is like if you knock them really hard towards a wall and they like slam against the wall, that's when they won't come back at you. But if they don't get wall splatted, they'll come back at you. Or if they're in DT, they jump off of a combo and they do the same thing. But it's very predictable when you do it off of a knockback. It's very consistent. And so he uses that to his advantage. First, he knocks the enemy back, so it charges his Royal Guard meter. When you perfect block this attack, he will jump back and then charge at you again. And you can basically have this Guard back and forth forever. Unless something gets in the way or whatever, or you miss a guard, you can do this forever. But now that he has this charged up guard, does a perfect release. And this creates some movement in the combo as well. So he comes back with reverb shock into that. Yeah, it's one of the firsts. And this property of the enemy coming back at you plays a role in later combos in this video. So you should pay attention to that when you get to it. Just think about the ways you can use this. Like there's having this sort of playstyle, there's a sort of art to it in the sense that you want to have the enemy in the air, but you don't want to have the enemy too high up in the air to where you can't do anything that connects to him. But you also don't want to have him too close to the ground to where your next move will have it hit when the enemy hits the ground. You want to keep the enemy in the air, so you kind of have to manage your height pretty well with this kind of juggle. Oh, I love this combo. It uses a lot of hysteric, which is Helena Ann's missile when he slams it to the ground. And that is perhaps one of the first, if not the first, use of hysteric as a finisher before the enemy hits the ground. Oh, I love this combo. Look at how smooth this air is. Ooh. It's so smooth. That little hop backwards with the swing is just fine wine. Into a wild stomp. You know, as I said before, in many ways, this combo is a step up from the previous combo that we mentioned, the first combo video ever. But as you can see, he did not buffer. He's like kind of standing there awkwardly, shooting the enemy until he gets the wild stomp. Whereas we saw in the previous combo video where the other player would shoot a bunch of charge shots as he's falling down into the ground and immediately transition into wild stomp, which is way smoother. So just because a combo happens later in time, doesn't necessarily mean that it's advanced in all aspects, but it's a minor thing. This is still a good combo. Oh, this is an actual glitch that happens in the game. I forget how you do it. I never actually done it on purpose. But I'm pretty sure speedrunners know. But yeah. How well he manages ZT. So one thing happened here. We should pay attention to this part. He knocks the enemy back and then catches the enemy when doing reverb shock. Now, I mentioned this a little bit in the last video, but when you knock an enemy back in DMC 3, you cannot stop it from knocking back with stun. You can only stop it knocking back with a launcher, or I think a knockdown or a knockback as well. But usually you don't want to knock the enemy down or knock it back more or to a different direction. Sometimes you can. It depends on the situation. But yeah, you have to launch an enemy after it gets knocked back, essentially, to catch it in the air from it going too far away. And this is what he does. There are very few instances in which you can do something like that. Like in the last video, we talked about how Doppelganger had this nice setup where he's doing a charge beast uppercut that catches the enemy before it like flies away with an aerial cross. that is a very specific situation, and this is one of those other specific situations that happens, and it's perhaps the most useful with Quicksilver, because you can move faster than the enemy can be knocked back. But later, in later videos, we'll see other examples of this being done in a more, let's say, fluid manner, without needing to use Quicksilver, if I remember correctly. Now, I don't know if this is the original DMC 3 or special edition, but I think it is special edition. Also, look at this. Ooh. He manages, this is probably the first combo video where you are able to do crystals before the enemy hits the ground. It seems like he hits the ground, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't. Look, with the bats keeping him in the air, he kills the enemy before it touches the ground, as you can see. The VOD can be a pretty interesting weapon if you use it well, but most people, even high-level players, don't really use it crazy. It's not as deep as people want to make it seem, but there are some pretty interesting uses for its bats, and we will see more crazy stuff, I'd say, in like 10 episodes from now, maybe even 20. Turning DT off and then on again, DT management. Turning it off again, but then turning it on to do this finisher. A taunt. Finisher. Okay, so one thing we should note here too is that you cannot activate Devil Trigger if you have less than 3 runes filled. This is why these first 3 circles on his HUD are highlighted. This is why it's highlighted in DMC, because without those first 3 being full, you cannot activate DT, and this applies to other DMC games as well. So it is good that he went out of Quicksilver just on time, because if he let Quicksilver play out, he wouldn't have 3 full runes of DT. And without that, you can't Quicksilver, if I remember correctly. You can't DT, that's for sure. Ooh, look at that! Here, listen to that sync with the Cerberus pause combo. So good. This is one of the best combos ever. Let's go, bro. This combo was super good. It still holds up in some ways. So this Kalina Ann move is called Grapple, and Grapple pulls enemies towards you. But you could look at it as another way, another kind of attack. Instead of a grapple or a pull move, it could just be seen as another knockback move. The reason for that is that when it hits, it knocks the enemy towards you. So you could think of it as like the enemy thinking, oh, I got knocked back behind this rock, right? But that didn't happen. But it still, this attack acts like that. So it causes the poor Abyss to actually run towards the rock. I wonder if this was specifically put, if the rock was specifically used to like prevent him from moving that far. Either way, you could probably do it with any other rock or edge. So it's probably easy to position yourself to start off this combo. But this this little thing here is something that I use in one of my videos called As Daylight Shortens, I think it's the video. One of the combos that I did, well, it's a freestyle video, but I put in one combo in the middle of like two freestyle clips, and I basically used this, but with a glitch that was found at that time, a shotgun glitch found by 475 and Schnee. Just you know, plugging my videos in, you know what I mean. I think Doppelganger here tries to like jump cancel swings and stuff. That's crazy. And that is basically bloody junk. Now we have some cute little groupers here and there. We see more of the frozen glitch on this Beowulf. We will see a dive kick glitch or quirk in a bit. As funny as this dive kick is, it has its uses, and if you do a dive kick on a ledge, it's a particular kind of ledge. It depends on the geometry, but also it depends on the character too, because Virgil's dive kick kind of has more of a extended hitbox, let's say, and so you can do more things with Virgil's dive kick, kind of. So in Mission 6 Trial of Warrior, I used a dive kick to a certain corner in a wall near a lamp, and it basically cancels my dive kick if I do it properly, if I angle it properly. And it can be pretty cool to do in combos. It looks less jank than it sounds, trust me. But yes, this has been bloody junk. Thanks for watching, guys. I don't know what I'll cover in another video. This one is a lot shorter, and hopefully it's gonna get shorter from here on out.